I was super scared to move overseas. I always knew my husband wanted to move overseas, but when we got married, I was so in love, and I thought that'll never happen. And it didn't for a really long time, and it was just totally like off the radar. And then one day, right after I'd given birth to my third child, he just said, I'm gonna send in an application with an organization. And I was sitting there nursing my baby, and I said, no, you can't, because I knew I wanted to have another baby, and I also have high-risk births. And I said, I can't give birth in a third world country. I was so afraid of everything. We took this test, and they gave us a score on something called harm avoidance, and I scored 100%. And nobody scores better than that. I have the best score on that. And my husband was 10%. And so we had a huge disparity. And we sat down with the psychologist who interprets the results. He just said, no, I bet you have some discussions about this. And we looked at each other. I said, all of our discussions are about this. I was just so afraid of germs and illnesses and tropical diseases. And that had been trailing me for a while in my life. And anyway, there was this point, and I randomly picked up a book at the library. It was called Barefoot on Barbed Wire. It was by Cindy Morgan. I think she's a singer. And so it was about fear. So, I mean, I just randomly picked it up and I was reading it randomly. And anyway, when I got to someplace, I think it was in the middle, and I read this paragraph and I thought, that's me. She said, fear can have so many faces. We can never really escape from the things that cause us to be afraid. For every one we secure ourselves against, there will be another waiting to take its place. The world is not under our control, so it all comes down to trusting God. And I had this light bulb moment, because before then I thought that I could control my environment and I could control, my contact with germs. I mean, if I stayed in America, and I could clean everything really well, and we can, we have access to modern medicine and all that, and I could just make sure that I controlled that enough, and then I wouldn't have to be afraid of things. But when I read that quote, I realized the fear came from inside me. And it started to change something inside my brain, where it wasn't like if I could just check off all of these boxes, I didn't have to be afraid. It was not external, it was internal. And then a friend gave me this book for kids about OCD. And it was called What to Do When Your Brain Gets Stuck, or something like that. And that is literally what it's like when you have a fear. And it's like your brain gets stuck on it, and you think, or I would think about the thing I was afraid of and what bad thing could happen because of it. And then I would try to rationalize that away. But it didn't work, because I would just go right back to it. It was this cycle. I would just think through the fear and the bad things that could happen, like over and over and over again. And anyway, this book identifies that for kids and says those things are like brain junk or brain trash. And so there are all these pictures of how you're identifying the thought in your brain, and you're actually choosing to throw it away. And that really helped me. I felt like later, like it was a fleshing out of the idea in Titus 2:12, where it talks about the grace of God teaches us to say no. And so I had to learn to say no to these unhelpful thoughts, these destructive thought patterns. And I had to train myself in that. I think it's in Hebrews where it talks about the mature have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And so it was this process of learning to identify the thought and say, that doesn't belong. I'm going to choose to trust God, and I'm just going to throw it in the trash. And I like to call it a practice, just like people practice medicine, because it still happens. I still have to identify thoughts. They're not necessarily the same now. I'm not as afraid of illnesses and germs and things like that, but I will still have thoughts. things that I'm afraid of, things that I worry over, that I have to choose to throw away and say, that's not a helpful thought. I can do it faster now. I can maybe do it better, but it's still something that it has to become a practice for me. And it is like medicine, because it's like, that's medicine for my soul, that I can get rid of those unhelpful thoughts and not have them anymore. It's so constant. Until about a year ago, it was a little more than a year ago, I just felt like God was calling me into deeper communion with Him. And I'd always been pretty haphazard about spiritual formation. I loved God, I loved worship, but like the setting apart of sacred time to be with Him was not something that had stuck with me. Maybe I hadn't gotten to that place where it was good, like really good. And so it just wasn't something that I'd ever made a priority. So I started to do that. And at first it was 10 minutes because I am a late night person. I do not like to get up early. So I started with 10 minutes and then just sort of built from there. And I think it was preparing me for a time later on, a few months later. I had a big breakthrough in God's love for me. And it was during this process that I'm starting to talk to God more consistently, more focused, and just really feeling like God loved my husband more than He loved me. And it went a little bit back to the fear of, do people like me? And I needed to earn their love. And it seemed like my husband was better at that, at earning people's love. So I started to think, well, this isn't fair. Why don't I get that? Why don't I get those gifts? And so I was praying about it a lot. I was asking God about it a lot, but I still wasn't getting anywhere with it. And I saw a counselor about that too. And that's a big part of my story. Over the years, just the counselor was able to help me meet God in that. And it wasn't a head thing anymore, because I could tell myself that God loved me the way He loved my husband, but I didn't actually feel it and I didn't believe it. And so I felt like I had this breakthrough. It was at the beginning of this year. And that was so powerful for me that it made me want to keep talking to God and get up earlier and make it consistent, even if I fail and don't get up one day, that I wanted to keep going back to that. When Christians talk about quiet times and devotional times with God, it can feel like a burden, and it can feel like this really legalistic thing, like you have to earn God's love and you've got to like prove that you're a good follower. And it's not like that. And I think it's like my passion now is getting people to connect with God. And it does involve taking time to sort of steal away with Him, but it's not to prove that you're this great Christian. That's where the healing happens in your life. And so when I talk about that and when I want people to spend time with God, it's not from, I think you're a bad Christian if you don't. It's just that I want people to have what I have now. And I cherish my relationship with God in a way I didn't before. I have fallen more in love with Him. I have this total confidence in His love for me that goes just beyond what anybody thinks about me. And I have experienced rejection this year and from God's people, but I go back to His love for me, and it's like the thing that stays me. It's my guide and stay, and I know that nothing else matters because He loves me, and that's all I need to know.